Hi, we are back with another video of Cherie and Elizabeth Talk Sports. I am Elizabeth from Hear Her Sports podcast, and once again, I am with the lovely Cherie Turner of Strides Forward podcast. Cherie, how are you doing this week?
I am doing really well, actually. The sun is shining here in Boston, and it's almost something that looks like warm. And we're just past springing forward, so it's later, and yeah, it's really good. And maybe that just put me in a positive mind frame because the thing I wanted to talk about today, my little update, is it struck me not too long ago here that in the context especially of running and being an athlete that I don't have to say mean things to myself. And that sounds really it sounds really simple and kind of silly, but I really thought about it. Like I've been so hard on myself for most of my life in most things, but I'm going to stick to the athlete space and just being harsh on myself and realizing like I just do not have to do that. I I never have to say a mean thing to myself again as
I
an
like that.
athlete. It's really refreshing and it's a little bit weird because it's like, wait, I don't have to be hard on myself? Huh. No, I don't. So it's been really liberating. And so I suggest that people try it. It's a very weird feeling.
Have you substituted saying good things?
I think I have actually. I hadn't really thought about that, but I think I'm just much because I'm not so focused on saying mean things, I'm sort of like, wow, I actually do work really hard and I actually am really disciplined and probably too much so. And also realizing that all the negative talk probably feeds into feeling like I need to overtrain or not feeling like I need to overtrain, but me actually
Right, sure,
overtraining because I
sure.
feel like I'm never doing enough or I need like it's just wherever I'm at is not good enough.
Right.
And really thinking like, "Oh, maybe where I am today is completely fine, and I'm gonna do the best with what I have, and I'm gonna look toward working toward a faster or stronger or whatever it might be tomorrow, but that I can be okay with what I did today." And yeah, so it's
That's
it's
awesome. I
yeah,
love it.
it's a new exercise. So yeah, so that's my nice spring update, I suppose. How about
Very good.
you? What's on your mind?
What's on my mind is nothing. And I thought about why that was. And I think it's because, the Berkey was such a big
Mm,
race for me. I put it down as an A race and I worked really hard to be prepared for the day. And now I'm sort of in like, what now mode. And really, my goals are mostly skiing goals, which means, not until January, maybe at the earliest, and maybe some cyclocross, but that would be September probably. So there's this like huge expanse of no, like goalless time. And I was stressing out a little bit about it, but then I remembered that, when I race bikes, I had a huge expanse of time, except that it was in the winter. So I think my mindset just has to shift a little bit that it's okay to be sort of goalless, which never is the case with me. I always have goals, but
right.
like I don't have any racing goals in the summer, and I don't know if that will change. I mean, what's really nice, and you have and I have talked about this in past chats, that I want to improve my running mechanism. So I've started working on the J stuff and the balanced runner, and hopefully that will make running sort of more pleasant and easier and stuff like that. And then I want to improve on my strength training. So for me, what I in the past anyway have viewed as sort of winter training is now summer training, and I just have to accept that that's what it is. And I really like this time, or I did when I was bike racing. I really like that time of year of just sort of stepping back a little bit, taking the pressure off of sort of that racing mentality, and going back to basics. And I think I'm really going to enjoy it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking as you were talking, is it's sort of like getting back to the foundation and just like I often think about it's like doing your scales as a musician or, like you always have to come back to those fundamentals because you
Yeah,
can get a little off your game. Um, so yeah, and just to clarify with people that by Jay, you're talking about Jay Grunke of the Balanced Runner, and she's a
right.
running form expert and Feldenkrais practitioner. And yeah, and she does phenomenal work. So
Yeah, I'm really
we
excited
both,
to get going on that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, let's move on to the episode that we're going to talk about today, which actually will, sort of lead us throughout the rest of the episode, but the rest of this episode. But the podcast episode is the Hear Her Sports episode. The most recent one is with Raquel Vélez, and she founded Alpine Parrot, which is a clothing company for sizes 14 and up. And very specifically, she started with a hiking pant because she herself is a size 16 and could not find a hiking pant. So the episode is totally fantastic. She is amazing. And just to start out, start our conversation, I really loved how successful she was
yeah,
right from the beginning. And it so shows how needed what she is making is. I mean, just to name a few, she started a Kickstarter for $10,000. She ended up getting $60,000. 10,000, 60,000. Just notice the huge difference and how
yeah,
much money $60,000 is. So that's super exciting. But also, she's gotten awards for the best pant. And these pants aren't even widely available yet. I mean, I think they're only available at this point to her Kickstarter. So it's being named as this incredible product, even though nobody can get it. And she has gotten great reviews in print. So it's super exciting. And I love that, she sort of went with it and followed through on her idea. I love it.
yeah. And there are many things I love about this episode. And one of the things that I really liked is that it's couched within your podcast, which is about women in sports. So it was really interesting to me to talk about like getting back to the fact that we need clothes that fit to do our sports. And she points out something really important, that it's part of safety.
Yeah.
And that's something that had never crossed my mind, but she's like, look, we were, women of her size and larger were wearing skirts because they couldn't find appropriate clothing to go hiking in. So what do you do when it gets cold? And she brought up some other issues as well, but I thought, like, I mean, safety, and then just feeling good in your body when you're out moving, being able to move freely. I mean, all these things are super important. Um,
And I think
and
also, sorry to interrupt, but I
yeah,
also
yeah,
think, like being able to enjoy your sport, being able to
right.
progress in your sport. And if you're hampered by something so silly as clothing, just, oh my gosh.
Well, and also just how welcome do you feel
Well, of
when
course. Yeah.
there's nothing available to you? Like not at all.
Right. Right.
So it's a message from sort of the larger outdoor community. And then yeah, it doesn't give you a lot of motivation to want to go out and try this thing if you can't find anything that fits. And she did mention the things that were fitting just looked awful.
Right.
And so
Or fell
like
apart.
or fell apart. Yeah, they weren't made well because there's just sort of this assumption that like, oh, this person's maybe not going to be serious or doesn't care. And it's just they're all just such gross assumptions. And yeah, so it's amazing to see her be so successful all at once. And I just love she tells her whole story in great detail, and it's so interesting just to hear about like how clothing gets made
Yeah.
and what she went through to do it. I mean, I just loved all the details. Uh but also it's always interesting to me. Like I'm a smaller person. I've always found clothing that fits me as an athlete, and I didn't have as much of an appreciation for when you're a size that doesn't fit in all the average sizes that you find out in the marketplace. Like how really hard it is. And I mean, I've had friends who like I mean, they're athletic women who have bodies that are slightly bigger than what fits in what is on the shelf, but it's astonishing to me that they can't find clothes.
Yeah. I mentioned this in the episode, and like I'm not trying to take it, like I'm not trying to butt my way into her making clothes for me, but I have always found it difficult to have clothes because I have a big rear end and I have big thighs, and it was especially hurtful as a kid, like
Oh,
not like trying to fit myself into sort of standard size kids clothing, and I mean even into high school, so we're not even talking like little kids, And it was just hurtful. I thought I was wrong. I thought my thighs were too big. I was too fat. Something was wrong with me. And, it wasn't until years and years later that I discovered that, oh, those thighs are for making a bicycle go fast. And,
Right.
I was never given that opportunity to sort of figure out that I was okay, but in a different way. And it just, so I totally empathize with not being able to find clothes and sort of how hurtful that can be and how it can impact sort of other life. Like, my feeling that my legs were too big, I can only guess sort of impacted how I carried myself and presented myself and sort of moved through high school or school or, that kid time, which is so difficult anyway.
Right. Yeah. And I guess this makes me think of that, you know, there is sort of like the language of clothing, like what it tells us about whether or not we're normal, right?
Right.
We're
Oh,
normal
sure.
or,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Do we fit the mold or not?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, yeah, it's great to see her having a lot of success. And yeah, there was a part of me that was just like, oh, I'm going to check out those clothes and like maybe I want a pair. And I was just like, oh, she's not making those for me.
That's see,
Right? There
exactly.
was
Yeah.
this
You
moment
wanted
of
them.
just
I
sort of
wanted
like,
them.
yeah, I'm just like, oh, but they're not for me because like so much stuff is for somebody my size. Well,
Right.
sort of, because I've had the same problems that you've had is that I am not shaped in the whatever average way. I'm short and I have the same body proportions you do. I have a very large glute area. I have big thighs, or at least I
Right.
had much bigger thighs when I was younger, and nothing fit me, you know. Thank God baggy pants were in.
Right.
You know, because that's I couldn't wear straight leg pants for like until I was, I don't know, in my late 20s.
Right. It's so interesting
So,
because we sort of talked about this last time about how there's this stock image of what an athlete looks like. And I even think about it now, I like the fabrics that Patagonia uses, but I can't fit into those clothing. I mean, their image of what a female athlete is totally not curvy. And
right,
I don't have big boobs and, none of the tops that fit my top uh, fit my boobs. They just like it's
right.
like a sports bra over I mean, I have jackets from Patagonia that like I was hopeful, and it's like I have a jacket sports bra.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it's yeah, who are they making these clothes for? I don't know.
yeah,
That's why we've all embraced yoga pants, right? Like, I
yeah,
mean, at least they'll stretch to fit different proportions.
yeah.
So, or like stretchy jeans has been my sweet spot for years.
Right. Well, we're going to continue to talk about clothes in the media section, and I've picked out an article which came out several weeks ago, maybe even longer than that, and I've been thinking about it ever since. It's a New York Times article. It was written by Tressie McMillan Cottom, and that's with an M at the end, not an N. And she wrote an article called Why We Should Talk About What Kyrsten Sinema is Wearing. And it's a fascinating article about, how can we comment on women's clothing and women's bodies in in a good way, in a way that's meaningful, and a way that is not uh, in the way that is not the way that we've been talking about.
Right. Other
Last
than
week
the way
we
we have.
right.
Yeah.
And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because in all the discussion about Jessie Diggins and the article that was in the New York Times calling her a sprite, there's been discussion to say, like we can't talk about women's bodies at all. Like just don't talk about it. And it struck, and I'm not convinced that's the way to go because bodies are part of athletics, and certainly male commentators talk about male bodies
Right.
when they're reporting on cycling, for example, which will be my example this week. So how can we do it for women in a way that's okay? And I don't know, I'd be interested what you thought about that article.
Well, yeah, I mean, there has been part of me at times that just stop talking about women's bodies. But I do agree that w- our bodies are what allow us to do our sports. So I think that talking about them is something that we do need to know how to do. But the problem is the way we've been doing it for so long. And it just seems like journalism, sports journalism, and I don't want to say it's all men, but I mean, mostly, they just can't seem to separate sexualizing women uh, with their athletic bodies,
Mm-hmm.
or just saying offensive things about how women look. And so what I really liked about this article is that she kind of says exactly that. Um, she talks about how we need to figure this out and that it is the responsibility of journalists to figure out how to talk about clothing and bodies in ways that are respectful. And I have to agree. And I think part of the reason why I have been like, stop talking about women's bodies is I don't trust the people
Right,
who are
right,
reporting on women to do it well. And so it's like, so I guess my point at this point in time is you, like mostly male sports journalists, you stop talking about women's bodies and let somebody else teach us how to do it right.
right,
Because undoubtedly, and I don't have a good example, but undoubtedly, there are many women who have been able to do this in ways that feel very respectful.
right.
So
I want to read a quote from the article that we're talking about, and
please.
it's and she's talking about if we don't talk about body,
Hmm.
the bias still happens. We just don't name it. And now I'm quoting: when you don't comment on bodies, you lose the discernment to think critically about how some bodies move through the world at the expense of how other bodies can move through the world. In short, when our language atrophies, we lose the mental acuity to talk about how power operates in our everyday life.
Right.
And I just love that.
Yeah.
I love that,
Yeah.
like language is so important that we have to learn how to be able to use it. And I think also, too, what I liked about that quote is that she talks about the unconscious bias, which I've been thinking about watching cycling on GCN because they have both men's and women's. And I've been thinking about how the men's commentary has been so exciting, and they go on and on about how um, Tadej Pogačar is so amazing, which he is. I mean, and they should be gushing because what he's doing right now is just incredible. But there's no equivalent happening in the women's commentary. And so I'm trying to sort of think about what is it that's making me think that there is not that equivalent. Are the commentators just less exciting? Are they less experienced? And if that's true, maybe they should switch positions,
Right.
so that the less experienced are commenting on the men's. So I don't know. I mean, but then I came up with like maybe just the men have, because there are men who are commenting on the women. Maybe they just have an unconscious bias that the women's racing isn't as exciting. And again, we'll go back to Cheryl Cookie, who says that it's like if you go into your commentary job thinking that it's not going to be very exciting, that's going to influence how you report.
Of course. Yeah. 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 I would agree with you. And one of the other things that came up reading this article is specifically talking about clothes. And undeniably, what people wear makes a statement. Like
Mm,
these people, in this case, we're talking about a politician, but it happens like we all buy clothing, we all spend money to look a certain way. Whether we care or not, it does send some sort of a message. And I think it really dismisses, especially on like when we are talking about somebody who's a public figure, like a politician or an athlete, um, you know, what they wear says something, whether they're being intentional or not. And it really dismisses the fact that like there's stylists around these people. Like this stuff is really well thought through. So to dismiss that there is any consciousness around how someone is presented is just, I mean, it's turning a blind eye on
right.
something that is actually going on.
And
So, yeah.
yeah, and two, I mean, going back to the Raquel Velez episode, I hesitated for a really long time to do podcast episodes about clothing because it felt unserious. Like I'm talking about
Mm,
equity, I'm talking about all this intellectual stuff, and like I'm more than talking about clothing. Why am I so upset about not clothing and gear and equipment not being available? But I am upset. So what is it? And so it took a lot to realize that this is important, but I think that's part of the bias. We think that clothing is not important. It's too feminine. If you talk about it, you're not smart. Like you're too fluffy. You can't do your job. You're focusing on the surface. And that's a bunch of hooey.
Right. Well, and if clothes didn't matter, then all these men wouldn't be dressing up in suits every day. So it goes both ways. And they
Right.
spend a lot of money. And like, I mean, I don't know anything about men's clothing. And I know that like the red tie is the power tie, you know? I mean, so these things do, whether we recognize it or not, like they seep into our consciousness. Like
Sure.
if a politician got up and was in a Hawaiian shirt and shorts, we would have something to say about it, right? I
Right.
mean,
Right.
so yes, and it has often been wielded as a weapon against women, of course, that we talk about them in disparaging ways
Right.
because of what they're wearing. And so that just needs to change. And I think she's spot on that, like she says in here too, there's another quote that I'll read, and it says, the media has struggled to put the meaning of style in a context that is not frivolous or demeaning.
Hmm. Yeah.
So there you have it. But and again, I don't have a good example, but like I believe that men's clothing has been talked about, and I don't know that I would ever think of that as like, oh, they're saying something demeaning about that man, right?
Right.
I think that there's just sort of this knee-jerk reaction at this point when if they're talking about a woman and what she wore, that somehow they're putting her down.
Right.
And
Well,
we
you
need
and
to
I
get away
now
from
need
that.
to pay attention to women talking about women's clothing and women's sports clothing or business clothing or whatever it is, and maybe bring some examples in the future. But I do love. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, well I was just going to mention the other article that that brings
well,
that to light, but I'll let you finish your thought first.
what I was going to say was that I one thing I love about this article, Cottom's article, is that this discussion totally mirrors sports, or sports mirrors what's happening in the rest of the country. And then I will pass it to you because you're going to talk about this other article.
Right. So the other article, which, most people listening are probably familiar with the fact that the Norwegian handball team got fined because they didn't want to wear the requisite bikini uniforms. Um, and of course, now that rule has been changed, but the New York Times had a good article about that as well. It's called Women's Handball Players Are Fined for Rejecting Bikini Uniforms. Uh, and that really got to the case of women being put on show for how they look. I mean, there's just no two ways about it that
Right.
there were rules around what they had to wear, and there are also rules in other sports that are similar, that really speak pretty obviously to the fact that women are being used as sex objects or objects to be admired, um, because of what we're asking them to wear, as opposed to focusing 100% on what the game that they're playing or the sport that they're doing. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it really puts the rules in the position of the viewer rather than the player.
Well, right. And it says a lot about why we tune into women's sports, or why the powers that be believe we should be tuning in,
Exactly.
or why we
Exactly.
should be showing them on TV.
Yeah. The thing that, I mean, that article is sort of old, and I can't remember exactly when it came out, but it was over the summer, right? During the Olympics.
It was first published in November of last year.
Oh, was it really? Wow.
This one. Yeah, this might be the updated one because my favorite part of this article was the update, and it reads, "The International Handball Federation has updated its rules so that women no longer are required to play in bikini bottoms."
Right.
I feel like it's the 1950s.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, it's just, I remember thinking, like, okay, somebody brings this to your attention, and you are the federation, you're, like the head of the federation. Like, why is your reaction not like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that rule is still in the books?
Right.
But no, they had to think about it and decide whether they should allow the women to wear shorts. And
And they got
just,
fined
I know. It
when they
just,
first did it. And the other thing that gets pointed out in that article is that the Norwegian Federation had been fighting this since 2006.
yeah.
They'd been complaining about it. And so it wasn't even anything new.
Right.
And, you know, I was reminded again, there was the photo that had gone around, and it's in this article from the New York Times of the men's team and the women's team when the women are in their official uniform of the past. And the women are in a bikini and the guys are in short sleeve shirts and shorts. And it's like, it's just so infuriating. But I guess going back to the point of like clothing, you know, making a difference and making a statement. Well, here's a statement that that athletes are being made to make that they don't want to be making,
Right.
you know. So like, you know, further to the point that clothing makes a difference.
Yeah, and I just like all I can picture is wearing those bikini bottoms, and you see it in beach volleyball, for example, and they're always picking at their suits, so that it's not going up their crack. I mean, that seems like tiresome. That would be
Right.
tiresome
Well,
for me.
and I have seen that some of those athletes say that they prefer to wear those
I have
bikini
too.
bottoms, and you know, and that's fine. But to not be able to, like, I just don't understand these sports that won't let people, in this case women, wear what they feel best in. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
It does make a person wonder why those rules are there at all. I
Right.
mean, I guess you don't want people wearing whatever, but
Right, but
like
like
a
having
wide berth would be,
options,
yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah,
options within the framework of a uniform,
right.
yeah, it just seems a little more reasonable. Um yeah, so
Yeah. Well, I look forward to talking to more clothing people on Hear Her Sports, and I look forward to finding language that we all can use that better is able to better talk about women's bodies and women's clothing in a very functional way. So
yeah, and I
until
am too. Yeah, and I sorry, I'll just interrupt to say that now I'm excited to pay more attention to how people are doing it right. I guess it's something I
yes,
keep trying to come back to is how people are doing these things right because a lot of what you and I talk about with the lack of sports media coverage with women is that we haven't even figured out how to talk about these athletes in a way that really reflects what we all feel as athletes and spectators and fans of these sports. Like, I just don't feel like journalism's caught up or commentating has caught up to why we think they're so exciting and how it feels to be these athletes.
right. I
So,
mean, I just thought about that. I'd be really interested to know, and like we can't go back in time, but like what would I have thought as a kid if on commentary they had praised women with big thighs in a way that was, I don't know, good. We'll say good because we
yeah,
don't know how else to
respectful,
talk.
valuable.
Respectful, yeah. Uh, like how would I have thought about my thighs that were not fitting into the jeans that I was trying to fit into? Like, would that have changed my perspective?
Right? Yeah. We'll have to ask some young girls at some point if they feel bad. I don't know, like when things change.
Right, exactly.
So,
Well, I'm going to wrap it up with that. This has been Cherie and Elizabeth Talk Sports, and I'm Elizabeth Emery from Hear Her Sports.
and I am Cherie Turner from Strides Forward. Thanks so much for watching.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.